Do you like the name Shmoozin?
It's a wonderful name.
It makes sense, right?
It makes a lot of sense. Okay.
We're good at schmoozing. Jews are good at schmoozing.
That's right.
Right? And that's where it all began.
Shmoozing is from Yiddish, by the way.
Yeah?
Yeah, sure. In fact, in the yeshivas, they used to have a Musar shmooze. This is where the Mashgiach Ruchani would speak for the boys. Now, they take great time from learning, and they teach them Musar, and it was called a Musar shmooze. It started in Europe.
Musar, a good translation for Musar is like character correction.
Correct.
Right, which the Torah is pretty strong on, let's be honest.
Yes, in fact, they usually say in yeshivas that if you only have 1 hour available, should you spend it on learning Musar or learning Torah? And the answer is learning Musar, because if you learn the Musar properly, you'll have time to learn Torah too.
Because it will make you into a better person.
Exactly.
Isn't ultimately that what Judaism is all about? Meaning at the end of all the learning, the classic comment is you've got to be a Mensch, right? And a Mensch really translates into a good person, decent person, caring person. It's not a complicated description of a human being. It's just like a good guy or a good gal, right? After all the learning and the scholarship, if you're not that, then what's happened to a person? You've been in this religious business for a while.
Well, I don't consider it a business, but it's funny that you should bring this up because Rav Asher Weiss, who's, in my opinion, is one of the Gedolei Hador today, living in Israel, was speaking in Yeshivat Har Etzion in Gush Etzion, and somebody from the audience asked him, "What's a good Jew?" So he answers, having the Torah knowledge of a Litvak, the heart of a Chassid, the honesty of a Yeke, the Kavod Torah of a Svardi, and the caring about society that a secular Jew has.
So a combination of all those things makes
a good Jew.
Makes a good Jew. Would you say that's a Mensch?
In my humble opinion, yes. In fact, my father, Zechron Avrocham, was not a learned man at all. He had to leave Cheder when he was 10 years old and go to work because his father had died. And his main message to me all the time is Kodem Kol Zaya Mensch, which means first of all, be a Mensch. That's the most important thing of all. Right. Everything else falls into place.
My feeling is that a lot of non-observant Jews are often put off by becoming more sort of religiously involved. And that word religious, I don't like the word religious, but we'll get onto that in a second maybe. I think they're put off sometimes by the fact that they see that there's not Menschkeit that runs through the religious world. And it makes the religion or the following of the religion much less enticing. Do you think that at all?
I agree. I tend to view people as individuals.
Right.
And it doesn't make any difference if you have a long beard or if you have a black kippah, kippah saruah, or no kippah. You have to judge the person by the way the person is. For instance, when we lived in America, and this goes back a long time, we had Catholic neighbors. And my wife and this Catholic woman are still in contact till this very, very day. They speak to each other on WhatsApp all the time, and they're such wonderful people. I remember about 25 years ago, we visited the States, and we wanted to visit these people, come for lunch, and we explained the whole topic of the kosher. So we explained to them what hashgacha means, and we gave them all the symbols like OU and Kaf K and stuff like that.
Right.
And you saw all these little kids with crosses going around looking for hashgachas.
That's so funny.
In the thing, and they even bought a special knife to cut the watermelon. Because they were so careful. On the other hand, we went to visit someone else who was a non-observant Jew, and he keeps a kosher home for his mother, who is observant. And he says, it's okay, I do this for my mother, that for my mother. And then at the meal, he starts serving a non-kosher wine. And then I pointed out to my wife that watch the wine, don't take any. And he saw that and he picked up and he said, George, what's wrong with the wine? You don't trust me? That type of thing.
Right.
He doesn't know.
It's often the case that it's almost easier for non-Jews because because there's no responsibility ultimately in terms of their own personal approach to life. There's a fascination and there's a more of an adherence to what their guests would need. Whereas a Jew who's a lot closer because they're Jewish, there's a pressure. I mean, I've lived through it. My family are not religious, so there's a balance. It's not easy, but Jews are prickly like that, I found.
To a certain extent, a lot of it comes from ignorance.
Right.
Because Jews did not get, Jews of, let's say, a certain generation, did not get a proper Jewish education. And many times if they did get the Jewish education, they only learned the rules and regulations, and they didn't necessarily learn how to apply them.
Or the spirit of the
spirit, exactly.
Right.
When I say application, I'm not just referring to washing your hands beforehand and making emotes and stuff like that, but I'm talking about behind it, what it stands for. Why are you washing your hands? What are you doing this for?
Right.
And the whole thing of making a bracha, that what you're doing is that you realize that you didn't earn the money to buy this food, but it's coming from a Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Right, from Hashem.
From Hashem.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is, this is a way of making brachas. You're thanking God for what you have.
Right.
And it doesn't make any difference if you're a Jew or if you're something else. You also very often see on these TV shows, you see them...
Grace before meals.
Grace before meals, exactly.
Where we did that in my school, my non-Jewish, non-kosher.
Right.
It was grace before meals.
Sure.
I don't think I remember it. But at least it was there to a certain extent,
Sure.
you know. It's definitely an interesting one. For all the years that you grew up observant, right, from the beginning. We're gonna get to that story soon.
The answer is not exactly.
Right, the answer is not exactly. Okay, so I'll tell you what, that's a pretty good segue into why I even thought it'd be a good idea to bring you in. Firstly, just so the audience can understand, have a bit of perspective. So you and I daven at the same shul over here, Beit Knesset in Ramot, Mitzpeh Ramot. Just a bit of a plug for our wonderful shul and a wonderful community, larger than just the Beit Knesset. Amazing things going on in Ramot Bet, I think you'll agree. And we've always, since we've known each other for probably the last year or so, properly, always got into good chats, always had a good schmooze. And then, when was it? Was it a couple of weeks ago around? We got talking, and then you just revealed this whole story side to you, which I knew one tiny bit about, that you were born in a DP camp. But then you opened it up, and I'm like, oh, wow, George, that's special. So I wanted to get you in to at least talk about minimally that, and then, of course, other things that are going to come up in the conversation. So, George, Stanislawski. Lavsky.
Yes.
Tough Jewish name to pronounce.
It's not a Jewish name, it's a Polish name. In fact, it's a very common name in Poland.
That was my first question. Okay. Where does that name come from?
Well, there was a town in Poland called Stanislav. And a man coming from Stanislav was called Stanislawski, and a woman coming from Stanislav was called Stanislawska.
Oh, right.
The name has been in the family for many generations. I don't know who exactly. My father, for instance, was born in Strykov, which is a suburb of Lodz.
In Poland.
In Poland. He had the name Stanislawski as far back as he could remember. I once thought of changing the name, and my father said, do nothing to dare do that, because he was the only survivor from that family. From the Stanislawski family. In fact, I have a list that I can show you as well of the Stanislawskis that perished in the war. And he said, no way. And then when we came to Israel and somebody suggested that we Hebraize the name, I said no. I made a promise to my father.
Right, and it stuck. So tell me, where did it begin for you? Where were you born, and what was that all about?
Okay. I was born in a DP camp in Germany called Fohrenwald, which is just outside of Munich. I have to start by why I was born in Fohrenwald is that my parents were both Holocaust survivors. My mother was from a little town called Rovno, which is near the Ukrainian border. My father was born in Lodz. And both went through the war in different ways. My father went through the Lodz ghetto and 3 concentration camps, work camps, concentration camps. My mother was relatively fortunate in that because she lived near the Russian border and the Russians were occupying her particular town. So when the Germans attacked the Russians, my mother escaped together with the Russian troops that were retreating. And she spent most of the war in Russia, always one step ahead of the Nazis.
Amazing.
Okay, she was in the Battle of Stalingrad, where she was baking bread for the Russian army. She used to sew uniforms for the Russian army. She was a lumberjack in Siberia.
Wow.
And just anything to stay alive. And my father was in the Lodz ghetto from 1939 to 1944 when it was liquidated. They sent him to a...
How old was your father at the time? In 39?
39, he was 28.
Well, it was already not young.
My father had a wife and child.
Oh, right, okay.
Before the war.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife was taken away in, I think, February of 1942. She was taken away to an extermination camp. And in September of the same year, they took away his daughter, who at the time was 7 years old. Her name was Esther Fege, and she was taken away to Humble extermination camp, where she was cremated there.
Oy vey, so sad. Oy.
And I observe a yahrzeit, which I found out, and that's another story.
Right. Well, we'll get onto that in a second because it's a fascinating story. So your father obviously was separated from them in 39.
42.
Oh, in 42. So, but he, in 39, he went into the ghetto with them, obviously.
What happened was the Germans attacked Poland in September of 39. Poland gave up after 2 or 3 weeks of fighting. So by the end of September, the Nazis were in total control of Poland.
That's right.
And one of the first things that they did was start moving Jews out of their house, building ghettos in the poorest part of town and squeezing as many people into places that they could, and then just starve them out, and whatever. And from time to time, they would do these, they called it evacuations, but basically what it was transferred to concentration camps or death camps.
Yeah, as we know, that was always the plan. Can you just bring your mic a little bit closer to your mouth, if you can? A tiny bit closer.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, that's good. So then they were in the Lodz ghetto, and for how many years? So for 3 years, for 2 years?
My father was there from 39 to 44.
Oh, wow.
And I said after the ghetto was liquidated, he was sent to a work camp called Sonnenberg, which is a slave labor camp. After Sonnenberg, he went to a place called Częstochowa.
Can I just ask you how, because you said that his wife and child were taken earlier than that. Did you ever speak to your dad about his loss and how he felt at that time? Because he never saw them again after 42, right?
True. My father never talked about his Holocaust experiences. Never. At least not to me, okay? Occasionally what he would do is he talked to my mother, and sometimes I heard stories from my mother of certain things. Also, when we first came to Atlanta, Georgia, there were 200 refugee families that were adopted by the Atlanta Jewish community. And these people were called the Green. And every Sunday they'd meet in a park and they trade stories. And sometimes I was listening to the stories they were trading.
So he would talk amongst the survivors?
The other survivors. They compare stories, or he'd tell my mother. Occasionally he'd tell my wife. In old later years, he'd tell my wife, or he'd tell Mike. He wouldn't talk to me.
Wow.
And the most amazing thing is that since he is gone, I have made so many discoveries. It's as if his neshama, his soul, is still talking to me. And with your kind permission, I'd like to give you a few examples.
Definitely.
Of that. My father passed away in November of 1987. His yahrzeit is this week. It's coming up.
Right.
And before he died, he said he has one wish, and that wish is to have my sister's name put on his tombstone, because he didn't know her yahrzeit. He didn't know when she was taken. He knew when she was taken away, but he didn't know when she was murdered.
This is your half sister. Before
my half sister, exactly. This is my half sister, and I didn't have any of that information. Now, what happened was that in 1995. I discovered it. How did I discover it? My wife was part of a German-American teacher exchange, and they had just visited Yad Vashem, and they were talking about a Lodge exhibit there. So when she came back, she talked about it. I said, okay, I'll go see the Lodge exhibit. And it takes like 10, 15 minutes to see, but I was there for 2.5 hours looking at every picture and every frame and every video, see maybe if I can spot him. I didn't. But at the very end of the Lodge exhibit, okay, they had 4 very thick books. Well, they look like the telephone books, like London telephone books or New York telephone books,
right.
Manhattan, of the internees of the Lodge ghetto. And I open up the book.
That were kept, obviously, by the Germans
they kept
religiously.
Very, very accurate records. Yekas are very, very accurate, okay? So I think these were eventually typewritten, because I think the ledgers were usually
in hand,
and then somebody typed them up afterwards. So I open up the book to the S's, and I see something like 24, 25 names Stanislawski.
Okay, just before you go on, what was your immediate feeling and reaction to that?
I started to tremble, because in the middle of all these names, I saw 2 names stuck out. One was Esther Fege Stanislawski, who was my half-sister, and the other was Yitzchak Stanislawski. I have a copy of the page, so...
You'll show me after, yeah.
Okay, show you afterwards. And I see the name there, and it has the profession of the person, where they lived, their age, and the very final column to the right is when they were liquidated from the ghetto. And I saw that next to my sister's name, it says September 23rd, 1942. So I went to the curator, and I asked him, how can I determine a yard site? Because I never knew her yard site. So he said, yeah, September 23rd, he says, that's the day after Yom Kippur. And there was a very famous thing, because the Nazis took 5,000 Jewish children under the age of 10. They shipped them away to Chelmno extermination camp, which is 60 kilometers from Lodz.
On the evening after Yom Kippur?
The next day.
Right.
The next day. Yud Aleph Tishrei on the Hebrew date.
Right.
That was the day. They sent him away. He said if they took them in the morning, then probably by the afternoon they were up in smoke already.
Gee whiz, man.
And that's how I discovered her yard site. Now, what's also interesting, this is a bit of a sideline, is for as long as I can remember, I don't like to daven for the Amid, but as long as I can remember, if there was no obligation to, let's say, someone who's saying Kaddish for I would always be the one to go up there and start davening right away.
This result with zealousness.
It's as if, her neshama is calling out to me. I didn't know why.
Oh, hang on. You did this before you discovered?
Before that, I'm talking about this. I made the discovery in 1995, but I've been doing this for 20 years before that.
That's unbelievable. Meaning there was something pushing you.
Her soul was speaking to me. Her neshama was speaking to me.
Because we've got people that are listening in who are either maybe not so aware of the jargon of our religious practice. When you say something, just try to say it like from the Amud.
Okay.
Meaning you stand up.
Be the prayer leader.
Prayer leader in the synagogue.
Yes.
So you were doing that for years.
At least 20 years before that.
On the end of Yom Kippur.
The end of Yom Kippur.
After Yom Kippur goes down.
After Yom Kippur, they're davening a weekday mareh, weekday evening service.
And you used to push yourself to go and daven.
Exactly.
Now, unbeknownst to you, it's the day that your half sister was killed.
Murdered. Correct.
So that's very powerful.
So that's 1995.
Right.
Okay?
See.
Another discovery happens in 2003.
Who were the other Stanislawski that were discovered that you found in that lodge?
There's uncles, there's aunts, there's cousins. My father's previous wife.
Your father wasn't alive at this point, no. So he
no.
Did his name appear anywhere?
Yes, I said his name was on the list too. Yitzchak. In fact, they even list his name is listed 3 times, because each time if he changed an address, he was moved. Let's say they closed a block, he'd had to move to another. So he's listed 3 times, because each time he moved, it was also on there. They kept detailed records. You wouldn't believe the type of records they kept.
On a side note, it makes a laughing stock of the fact that anyone could deny the Holocaust ever happened, because it wasn't that the Jews were keeping the records, for goodness sake. They were keeping the records.
That's right.
So if you want to deny it, there's no substance to the denial, none whatsoever. The Germans were like, we're going to succeed. We're going to keep such a good record that's going to go down the chronicles of this Third Reich that we're going to create. And of course, Baruch Hashem, that never happened. But so what next? What else?
Okay, 2003, 8 years later. 8 years later, we're in the middle of the Intifada, and I see an item on the news while at my computer saying that some Hollywood star, I don't want to mention her by name, of Jewish descent, who decided to call Gaza, or Gaza as you say, the largest concentration camp in the world. Okay. And that, all my fuses blew.
Right.
I was really, really angry. I was really, really angry because how could she say that? Being a son of a Holocaust survivor, she doesn't know what a concentration camp is, and to say something like that is like a travesty of
betrayal.
The betrayal of the 6 million that died. How can you do that? So I just got up out of the seat, and for some reason or another, I had this push to go to Yad Vashem. They had just opened up the new building there, and it's not new anymore, but in 2003 it was relatively new.
Right.
And I decided to pay for a tour. And this tour lasts over 2 hours. And I'm taking the tour. I said, why am I doing this? I know everything this. I mean, I've known about Holocaust and concentration camps, from day one, as long as I can remember. Why am I taking this tour? At the very, very end of the tour, there's a wall-sized picture. It's a very, very famous picture of the inmates of Buchenwald attending a service after the war led by Rabbi Herschel Schachter, who was an American chaplain in the American Army. And you see the concentration camps, many of them still in their pajamas, the striped pajamas, and you see these GIs, Jewish GIs, and they all sing together. And then she says the little boy between the two GIs is Rabbi Lau, who then was the chief rabbi of Israel. Today is the former chief rabbi of Israel. Because then he was like an 8-year-old boy.
That's right.
And then I looked 2 rows, because it's a wall-sized picture, so I can see 2 rows above one of the GIs. I spot my father.
Oh, my gosh. George, that's
staring me.
That's unbelievable.
And I can't, I'm sorry, I get emotional.
Me too.
I can't help feeling that I heard that thing saying that Gaza's big country, but that pushed me to go there. So that's the second message that I got after, Another message. 2015. I don't read newspaper. Ever since I have the internet, I stopped reading newspapers, stopped buying newspapers.
I didn't know newspapers still existed.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm a little bit older than you are.
No, but I remember.
I used to read them cover to cover, okay?
Right.
Okay. So I don't do that. And I happened to notice an ad that they're having a convention of children who were born in DP camps after the war. They want to make a convention.
Okay.
All right? And the convention was being held in Tel Aviv University, and so I applied, and I went to the convention, and there were 1,200 people there, all from children who were born in DP camps. And when they got there, it was like Germany was one thing, Italy was another, because they had the DP camps. They had in Cyprus, they had in Germany, Italy. I think they may have had some in France too. And there were lines there. And for some reason or other, I remembered the scene from Schindler's List when they're all sitting with the typewriters and they're coming into line. And I imagined myself in the German line.
Wow.
Going up there, but it was different because we won. So we attended this lecture, and this was very, very interesting. There were a lot of very interesting speakers, and there was some entertainment. At one point, I went out to get a breath of fresh air, and in the lobby they had various stands of various organizations selling their wares, and they go up to the joint. There's Joint Jewish Distribution, JDC.
Yeah.
To go up to find out what they do there. So I said, "Why are you guys here? What do you do?"
Right.
Because I thought they were only during the war. And he says, "I'll tell you what we do. What's your name?" So I said, "My name is Stanislawski." So he looks up on the computer, says, "Do you know what George Stanislawski?" I said, "Yeah, that's me."
Well, okay.
I'm on the list, and who's Yitzchak? This is my father, and who's Chana? Okay, well, you're on our list. He says, "You don't have a Spanish accent." This isn't him. I said, "Why?" So he says, "You were supposed to have gone to Paraguay after the war from the DP camp. You were supposed to have gone to Paraguay." And I have the cards, and I see that
that's what you sent me on WhatsApp. The destination,
that's
Paraguay.
Right. That's right. That's what it says. That my parents were claimed to be farmers. They never farmed like they're city people. They never farmed at all.
Right.
But Paraguay was probably the place to. My parents never told me this. I don't think they knew themselves, but they were listed as probably the joint listed something as that they were farmers, and what they did was that they were supposed to go to Paraguay. I also happened to notice that there were other Stanislawski, like Anton and Christoph Stanislawski, who were probably Polish Catholics, who were probably also pressed by the Nazis for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. They had to go to the States. They were registered to go to the States. I have a feeling, in typical Jewish way, somebody switched destinations. We ended up going to America.
Wow.
And probably Anton and Christoph probably went off to
Paraguay.
And that's how we ended up going to America. But my parents never mentioned Paraguay. I didn't know anything about it. But this is the third message that happened.
A completely different convention. In amongst all of this, because we've discussed a lot about your dad. You know, what was your mum like after the war? And of course, you were conceived in after liberation.
Yes. Liberation was in 1945. I was born in 1946. Yeah.
That in of itself for me has always thrown up images of unbelievable things of like, wow, basically here were the survivors. They were getting married. They were like it's easy to say, oh, we'll brush ourselves down and we'll just move on. No. But there's a force behind this story that two survivors in a DP camp with God knows what was going on in their minds, from their experiences, from their losses, from the trauma, real trauma, and yet they got married. Who married them?
May I interject?
Please.
Okay. First of all, how they met. Okay, after the war, Lodz became the central meeting point for people looking for survivors, for surviving family members, because nobody knew. My mother seemed to be the only one left from her side, and my father was the only one from their side. And the word had it that the place to go to is Lodz. And in Lodz, they'd have bulletin boards with little stickers on them. The Chaim is looking for his brother Yaakov, or Sarah is looking for right. Esther. This is what they did. And both of them went to look for relatives. They did not find any relatives.
They left the DP camp.
No, this was a transit. Lodz was a transit. No, this was. Here they came. They both went back to their own respective homes looking for somebody. My father was in Lodz looking for relatives.
After liberation.
After the liberation,
Oh,
my mother came back from Russia because she'd been in Russia during the war. So she came back to Poland to her home. They couldn't find anybody. They said, well, maybe the other survivors are looking for each other in Lodz. Go to Lodz, because
I see.
There were a lot of there were tens of thousands of coming to Lodz looking for.
It must have been very busy there.
It was very, very busy there. Now, what happened was that they didn't find relatives, but they found each other. They met at one of these stations while they were looking.
Wow.
They knew each other exactly 2 weeks, and they got married.
Oh my gosh.
And the reason why. It's not that, but there was a push. My parents are only like one example of many stories that repeated, because when I was at this convention I was telling you about before, the same story kept repeating this all over again.
It must have done.
They just got on with life.
It's unbelievable.
Got on with life. You get married, and we start anew. And this is basically the whole thing of Jewish history.
In a way, it's poignant that we're having this discussion this week in the Parsha of Lech Lecha, because Abraham, this is what he was all about. He was not only about recognizing Hashem and doing what Jews have done ever since, which is to be the ambassadors of the spiritual reality in our world, but he, with the self-sacrifice characteristic of our great-great-great-grandfather Abraham, Avram Avinu. This is typified in this story. It's like you couldn't dream of the biggest, worst nightmare to have gone through, and yet these people had the self-sacrifice, had the strength of character, no matter what was going on, to move on and to keep the Jewish people going. And you are an example. You're a product of that. I mean, we all are in a certain extent, but you directly are. That's a...
I don't think so. It's. I told you before that the Atlanta Jewish community adopted 200 refugee families.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them had come from Hasidic homes and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My father was the only one of the 200 who remained Shomer Shabbos.
Right.
Okay, the rest of them went into business, and in Atlanta, Georgia, in those days.
No, but I'm talking about they just decided to get married. I'm not talking about the observance side of it, because that's a very different discussion.
We have to start from anew.
Right, and a lot did it.
A lot of did it was because it kept repeating. I met at this convention. I met another 4 or 5 people who also were products who were also born in Fohrenwald, the same camp I was, and same story. Their parents had met either in lodge or here like that, and they knew each other very, very short period of time, and they said, "Okay, we're getting together." There was no dating, there's no romance and stuff like that. We're getting. Okay, we're going to restart the Jewish people.
So who was their Masada Kedushin? Who married them?
I don't know, but I have their ketubah.
Right.
In fact, I always thought that they got married in Fohrenwald.
I would have assumed the same.
I always thought, but their ketubah, I discovered their ketubah after they both passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was going through the things before, I was about to sell their flat.
Mm.
And the ketubah said that they got married in lodge. And I couldn't understand why it said that. Then I checked with certain Holocaust experts, and they told me the story that Lodz became the transit camp where people were looking for each other. And the reason why they moved to Fohrenwald was that the communists were coming into Poland.
Oh, I see.
They were going to take over Poland.
Right.
And my parents were able to escape to the American zone of Germany.
Right.
And that's where I was born.
And that's why they ended up back in Fohrenwald.
Fohrenwald, right.
Where did they stay? It's always been in my mind, like, okay, so they got married, but like, because I've never visited those places. I never had the desire to do that yet, even though, mainly because I know how emotional I know I will be there. And it's not that I have to get ready for it. I've done a lot of emotional things in my filmmaking career. I just haven't gone. Okay. So I don't know visually what any of these type of places, apart from the things that I've seen on Yad Vashem and various documentaries and whatnot. But where did they stay to have a married life, if you know what I mean? Like, where was the privacy and the intimacy and where?
In answer to that question, I have to tell you my father's theory of relativity. Now, it's not Einstein's theory of relativity, it's my father's theory of relativity.
I'm all ears.
Okay. When they first got married, when I was born, we lived in a shack, like a little caravan, okay? The 3 of us, okay? My mother, my father, and myself. But it was only half a room that was separated by a sheet. And there was another family, also husband, wife, and child, on the other side of the sheet.
Wow.
Now you say, wow. For my father, this was the Garden of Eden.
Right.
Because a year and a half earlier in Buchenwald, he was sleeping on one of these boards with 5 other men. So each one, when you want to turn over, you had to do that, and everybody caught typhus and whatever from the other. So for my father, it was Gan Eden. All of a sudden, he had 3 of us in a half a room instead of 6 people on a board.
Yeah, just stay close to the mic. Okay. It's better for us.
And then we got to Atlanta, Georgia. And I told you the Atlanta Jewish community adopted the refugee families.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave us a room in the back of the local mikveh. Mikveh is the ritual bath.
Mm-hmm.
So we're living there. So again, my father, everything's relative to what happened before.
Of course,
all of a sudden, we were 3 of us in only one room.
I understand that. For your dad, it's like...
And then we finally were able to rent an apartment, rent a flat. 2 bedrooms and a living room and a kitchen. And my mother said too, We're going to do all this room. We don't need any room. We have so much room to do. So I went to sleep in their bedroom, and the second bedroom was rented out to another Holocaust survivor who was single.
Incredible.
Okay. Also, my father was making minimum wage at the time. And
so that helped.
They needed extra thing. And then when they finally, after about 6 or 7 years in America, they were able to buy their own home. So all of a sudden it was a 3-bedroom house with a living room, dining room, all this land around it, etc. So they rented out 2 rooms. I was when I say 2 rooms, actually they rented 1 room to a permanent. Then because they were the only observant family in Atlanta at the time that you could trust. So the people who come from Israel to raise money for the yeshiva or for the soup kitchen, they're called Mishalochim. They used to stay with us because they wanted to stay in the Shomer Shabbos place. So the Mishaloch would stay in my bedroom. So either if there were 2, I'd sleep on the couch. If there's 1, so I had to, I was 11, 12, 13 years old, and I had to put up with a guy that's old guy that snored and ate a lot of garlic.
Right.
So this is what, and I never really had a room to myself.
Right.
And let's say at 12, my parents sent me away to yeshiva in Baltimore, and when I came home, I'd have
that was
one of these Mishalachim would be staying with me.
But you're right. It's relative to what you know.
Everything is relative. This is, as I said, his relativity is different from Einstein's theory of relativity.
I understand.
But he always looked everything is a step better.
It's hard to because a lot of the older generation, and I'm not going to put myself in that category for obvious reasons, but even I remember. Things were not as easy as they are now, but it's not fair almost to say to the kids of like my kids, what difference do they know? They never had to do the heavy lifting of survival and stuff. So it's not really fair to say, oh, do you know what it was like in my day? I never thought I would be the one to say it, but yeah, I do say that. And my wife says that, but we had it unbelievably easy compared to that. Back to the DP camp. So you're born. Now I have a clearer picture of how it all basically, yeah, how did people create babies, but they just got on with it. And it was just that they probably had understandings and whatnot because these were good, decent, very, very...
Separate by a sheet, that's it.
Amazing. So you're born, which then leads me to one of my heroes in my Jewish journey, the Klausenberger Rebbe. Which also any mention of him lights me up. For the audience who don't know, that a big Hasidic Rebbe, as I mentioned before in previous podcasts, had a wife, 11 children, all got killed in the Holocaust. He survived, and beyond a giant of a human being and a Jew. What he did after the war: remarried, many more kids, created Kiryat Sands here in Netanya Hospital, the Laniado Hospital, etc. And he was your Sandek at your Brit.
Correct.
Which is not bad.
Well, the reason why he was my Sandek was that, first of all, my father was one of these people who knew how to get things. Now, the Klausenberger Rebbe wanted to establish a Beit Midrash, a study hall in the camp. And my father was... He
was a macher. Your dad was a macher.
He knew how to handle and to get things. So he was helping him. And because I had no grandfathers, we had no uncles, aunts, whatever. So the Rebbe agreed to be the Sonic of my bris. Now, if I want to fast forward about 35, 40 years, fast forward, I'm in Tzfat for vacation with my wife, and the closest shul to the hotel we were staying in was the Sanzer Stiebel. Sanz is an offshoot of Klausenberger.
That's right.
And I go in there, and I'm there for 3 times a day for the various services. I'm wearing jeans and a T-shirt and my knitted kippah, and everybody else there's got the beard and black coat and whatever. Right. And they don't pay attention to me whatsoever. And then the last night we were in the hotel, I go in, and I came a little bit too early for the evening service, and I see a book about the Klausenberger Rebbe, and I start to thumb through the book. Mostly because they had a lot of pictures in it. I want to see maybe I could find a picture of my father.
Right.
And this chassid sees me reading the book, and he says to me in Hebrew, "Huaya Adam Gadol," which means he was a great man.
Mm-hmm.
So I answer him in Yiddish, and I say,
Oh, wow.
Okay, ich weiß, I know. Was gewesen mein Sandig bei mir from Bris, which means he was my godfather at my circumcision. And the guy's jaw drops.
Yeah, right, of course.
Drops.
Awesome.
Okay, and they're giving like a little Torah class off to the side because I'd come in earlier. As soon as the Torah class finishes, he makes a beeline straight to the guys, and I see his very excited activity. And he's looking, he's pointing towards me and looking at me like that. And all of a sudden, about 12 guys there, they stand up and they walk over and they get into a line.
Wow.
And they stick out their hand. I say, Shalom Aleichem, was macht ihr? Which means, welcome, come in peace.
Right, yeah, of course.
How's it you doing? And that was my few minutes of fame, in the
Son's dynasty.
Because the next morning, I got called up to the Torah. You normally have to pay for going up to they auctioned it off beforehand because everybody wants to get the honor. They gave it to me for free. And then I came back 3-4 years later. Nobody remembered me. So, but I had my 15 minutes of fame then.
Right, very nice, amazing, and he was a great man, the Klausenberger Rebbe.
Wonderful Rebbe.
So he held you at the Brit. He did amazing things in that DP camp, as I've read. Made sure the children. He became the Zaidi, the grandfather of all the children. You were lucky enough to have parents. There were many that. Do you remember any of it?
I have glimpses, little glimpses, things that flash in my mind from time to time, but not something to.
No.
After the war.
When did you leave the DP camp?
1950. I was born in the end of 46, and we left January of 1950. We came to the United States.
4 years. I mean, you could have
3 and a half. 3 and 2 months because I was born in November. And we left in January 50. So
any photographs of you and the family there?
Yes.
That you have?
Yes. I'll show them to you afterwards.
Okay, so then you went to America because we haven't got onto the subject of you making Aliyah, of course. How was America? How was America? You went to Atlanta.
We went to Atlanta, Georgia. I said the Atlanta Jewish community adopted us. My father said, I don't want to get any aid from you. Just find me a job. And because most places in those days, in the United States in the 50s, forget about being Sabbath observant, because they usually said, if you don't come in on Saturday, don't come in on Monday. That was the thing. He was able to find one place where he was getting minimum wage. And he worked there for many, many years. He was also the head of the Chevra Kadisha, which is the burial committee of Atlanta.
What was your father's profession before the war?
He was a tailor. And in this furniture factory became an upholsterer. But during the war, he did anything to stay alive.
No, obviously, but in Atlanta, he worked for a furniture upholsterer. Did you say?
Yes, it was a company that made dinette sets for breakfast rooms.
Okay, so he was handy.
He used to do the upholstery for them. He was very, very handy. He was always
right.
He was very, very capable to do.
So he was able to maintain that job and keep Shabbos.
Yes, he didn't come in, but the payoff was the trade-off was that he was getting minimum wage,
right?
Which at the time was like $1.25 an hour.
Wow.
Okay, and my mother, to supplement, would rent out the rooms, like I told you earlier.
So how did they build up to get in a stronger financial position?
They were chronic savers. My father also had a case against the German government, and he was able to also get reparations for the 5 years that he was under German rule.
Wow, I never heard of that ever. That's the first I've ever heard of something like that. An individual, but there must be many individuals.
There were many individuals, but there was probably a class action suit, but he was one of many.
Who was leading the class action?
I don't know.
Right,
I was a very little boy then. I don't know the details. All I know is that it wasn't a lot. He was getting a few hundred marks a month, but for as long as he lived, and that carried it over. And as I said, my parents were very chronic savers.
Did they give him a Mercedes like they gave all the Israelis?
No Mercedes.
I remember that coming to Israel in the 80s. Everything was Mercedes. That was all part of the war reparations as well, I think.
That was instead of going to the actual survivors, the Israeli government got the money, and they got the money with the intention that the government would help these survivors. Unfortunately, that was not always the case.
Anyway, moving swiftly on. That's a whole other topic.
Yeah, that's right.
So they were chronic savers, and they had this little reparation thing coming in. And then, so how long was your dad in that job?
Till he retired.
Oh, right, okay. So he built the money up outside of that, and he just stuck to it.
Obviously, he had a raise in salary as well, but he started very, very, and we were living.
It wasn't a Jewish company.
It was owned by Jews, but they weren't observant Jews. The owner was a Jew.
How many observant families did you grow up with in Atlanta? What was the strength of the...
At the time, the entire Jewish community had 16,000 people, of which I doubt if there were more than 10, 12 observant families that kept Shabbos. That brings me to the next story.
Wow.
The local rabbi, who's an amazing man, and he's older today. He's well in his 90s today. He was a rabbi. His name was Rabbi Emanuel Feldman. Came in as a young man in the early 50s, and he changed Atlanta completely. Today, if you go to Atlanta, it has thousands of Orthodox Jews. And this is the work of this Rabbi Feldman.
As a young man coming
in. Okay, his son now took over his position. His son now is in his late 60s. Right. Okay. And
there's yeshivas, there's kollels, there's people learning.
Yes. So what he would do before they had all that, because he didn't have anybody to do that. Mm-hmm. So first of all, he went to either traditional families or religious families, if you were, and he said, "You have to send your son away to learn." And this is what he did. He came to my father. And he says, he didn't say your son should remain observant. He says, if you want your son to stay Jewish, you have to send him away. I was 12 years old at the time.
How did you feel about that?
Mixed feelings. I'm an only child as well. And my parents decided to listen to Rabbi Feldman, and I went off to yeshiva in Baltimore called Chafetz Chaim. In those days, planes were only for millionaires. So it was a 16-hour train trip. I came home 4 times a year.
How many years?
I was there from age 12 till I graduated high school, age 17. So I was there. And
were you learning secular studies as well there, obviously?
Yeah. It was a yeshiva high school. No, so we'd have Torah studies in the morning, and then in the late afternoon.
Because you didn't have any in Atlanta, there was none. Not
there. They started a Jewish day school a year after I had already gone to public school, but they were always adding one grade at a time. So I was always 1 year ahead of them. So I was going to the public school till that.
On this point is a good juncture to ask you a very simple question, and that is, what's your relationship like with Hashem? It's a simple question, but the reason I ask it is because I have a very simple outlook when it comes to observance, and that is ultimately your experience of observance is relative, talking about relativity, is going to be relative to the strength of your relationship and the happiness of your relationship that you have with Hashem, who's behind it all. I think that a lot of people make a massive mistake, either secular or religious, where they look at the rituals, they look at the doing, they look at the traditions and whatnot, and they don't concentrate on the most important thing, which is behind it all. And what's behind it all is not just belief in Hashem, but it's you and Hashem. Because if you're not interested in it, oh my gosh, I couldn't think of a more tedious way to spend your time. And I do understand why people are not interested in it. If they see it as tedious, then why would I want to get involved in a tedious thing? I'm a Baal Tshuva, which means I came back to it at the age of 25, or rather, not back to it, but I returned to it, whatever you want to call it. So it's something I desired. I still desire it today. So the inspiration and the motivation is exactly the same. I love Hashem, completely not ashamed to say that. But for someone who grew up in this somewhat post-Holocaust, complicated, traumatic situation, then you go to America, then you're not in a strong religious community, except you have this amazing young rabbi who tells at least one of his congregants to send the kid away. So then you go away to a yeshiva in Baltimore for 4 years.
6 years.
For 6 years. And that's why I'm asking you this simple question. So how was your relationship with Hashem formed in that period? Because you're in a yeshiva situation, you're in America, you're away from your parents. And how did it set you up for the rest of your life? Because you're clearly still a friend of Hashem.
I hope so.
Well, I think so.
Okay.
I think it's
my relationship with Hashem can be summed up in one word: thanks. Every single morning when I open up my eyes, before I get out of bed, I have my ritual lasts 5, 7, 8 minutes where I'm saying thank you for all the things that I have.
Hang on, you're saying beyond Modeh Ani, which we are...
Modeh Ani, past that. I go into details.
That's beautiful.
Okay, thanks. Then I usually use that time also to, especially now, to ask for protection from corona and other diseases and everything that's going around, and protect us from harm and evil people and whatever. So I take time in doing that as well. And then I put it all in his hands and I say, thank you for that. And then the last few minutes is praying for people who are sick or have been sick, and I don't want them to get sick again. And I used to do it in the middle of the Amida service, but what happens, the list got so long that people would be finished and they'd already do the Chazal and everything, and I'd still be up there because, as I said, the list is so long. So what I did was, instead of, except for a few names of people who were like very seriously ill,
which you'd include in your
Amida, but otherwise all the rest, I usually take those extra few minutes in the morning before I get out of bed, and I do this ritual. I don't consider myself a wealthy man as far as money goes. I'm thankful we're comfortable, but I don't consider myself a wealthy. But I consider myself wealthy in that I give thanks to Hashem for every single thing that I have. And this probably is also the influence of my father with this theory of relativity I told you about earlier, which also helped a lot. It's the whole thing is to being satisfied with what you have. In fact, there's this story of the manna that fell from heaven. Yeah. Okay. There's a verse there that says that the one who grabbed a lot never had any more, and the one who was not able always had enough. It was the manna. It was basically psychological. In other words, the manna always seemed to satisfy everybody, whether or not you hoarded a lot or you didn't get to it because you were in the back of the line because all the bullies got to before you did. But everybody always ended up enough. And I got a lesson from that, saying, what I have, I'm happy. I don't have to be Bill Gates. I don't have to be Mark Zuckerberg. I don't have to do something like that. I have what I have. I'm satisfied. Are they happier than I am? No, I don't know. They may have more creature comforts. They can afford things that I can't afford, but I don't know if they're happier. I am happy. Right. I'll give you an example. All right. Growing up as a child of Holocaust survivors, I didn't have any grandparents. I didn't even have pictures of my grandparents. I never even saw them because I discovered what my grandmother on my father's side looked like when I was 19 years old, when my father discovered a brother in France. Right. Wow. They hadn't seen each other in 41 years. That's another story, which I have a picture that made the front page of the paper. I have a picture of that as well. Was that the picture you sent me of that wall? No. The wall. Because I saw French on there. That's right. That's a different discovery. Okay. I started before with all these messages and stuff. Yeah. And I didn't finish the list of messages. I'm sure. Okay. And this is all. But I'm not a spiritualist. I don't believe in seances and stuff like that. No. But I really feel that my father's neshama, but it's more than a soul. His neshama is always sending me a message. Every couple of years or so, I get something from the past. And we started talking about that, then we went off. And
now we're doing this.
Okay, and that was there's something, and I appreciate every single thing that I have. Thank you. My appreciation started basically after I came to Israel. While I was in America, okay, I was observant.
It's coming a little bit closer again.
I was observant while I was in America.
You can do this. You can bring it there if it's comfortable.
I was observant while I was in America, but I didn't have the spirituality. In other words, I daven, but as out of rote. Also because coming in America, very few Americans who are observant don't necessarily know what they're saying. They read the words, but they don't know the meaning of the words. Mm-hmm. It's only after I moved to Israel that I developed spiritual lenses. And I started in the same way. Let's say somebody wears glasses. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you take off the glasses, then look blurred. And then you put the glasses on. Mm-hmm. Israel, I developed spiritual lenses. And you see, I've seen one miracle after the other happen to me.
Right.
And getting back to the grandparents again, I said that my grandmother on my father's side, I only saw a picture the first time because he discovered a brother who had left Poland before the war, and when the two brothers united, he brought a picture of my grandmother.
Oh wow!
So So I have that picture. Same thing happened when I got married. Baruch Hashem, 52 years ago.
Wow!
We have an aunt from Argentina, my mother's side, that left also before the war. She came to our wedding, and she brought a picture of my grandfather, who I'd never seen before. So in other words, that I only saw the first picture when I was 21, because I got married at age 21.
Right.
So these are also all these little discoveries are happening.
Links in the chain.
Links in the chain.